looking at our new regional tools for the SRH plans. My name's Ian, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm delighted to see so many colleagues from our country offices, and also to welcome the distinguished panel you can see there in the International Center for Reproductive Health. We've got Olivier, Emily, and Katrina. So good morning and welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm very excited about the process that we've been through, and I'm looking forward very much to hearing what we're going to do next. And I'd like to also acknowledge the colleagues from the country. So maybe could we just have a quick round of introductions from all our colleagues, so that our partners in Ghent know who it is that's on the line. That might help orient a little bit the conversation. So maybe in alphabetical order. Please just quickly say hi and who you are. That would be great.
Good morning. Good morning, Ian. Good morning, Tamar. Dear colleagues, this is Dorina from Albania. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dorina. Hi.
I'm Leila from Albania too.
Hi, Emma.
Good morning, colleagues. This is Khurshid Ergitov, SRH Program Associate from Tajikistan.
Hi there, Khurshid. Thank you for joining us. Must be about your lunchtime now.
Oh, it's okay. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. This is Leila from Georgia Country Office. Very glad to see you all.
Hi, Leila. Nice to see you too.
Hello.
Hello.
Oops. Hello, I'm Gaukhar from Kazakhstan.
Gaukhar, hi.
Hi.
Good to have you online. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Asel Turgunova, Program Associate for Kyrgyzstan Country Office.
Hello, Asel. Nice to meet you.
Good morning. This is Zara, UNFPA Kosovo, SRH and Youth Program Analyst. Good morning to all of you.
Good morning, Zara. Hi.
Hello, this is Behruz from Uzbekistan.
Hello, Behruz. Come on, Kamal, say who you are. You need to unmute.
I'm sorry. I'm Kamal, Reproductive Health Program Officer, and our assistant rep, Ayana Seyitlieva, is also with us, joining us.
From Turkmenistan.
Hello, everybody.
Great.
I'm Pavlo from Ukraine.
Hello, Pablo from Ukraine. How's the new boss?
Great, great.
So Jaime joined yesterday. I'm sure you all saw that. Jaime Nadaroch is our new rep in Kiev. Do we have any other? Can you scroll? Any other country office colleagues? I think that's all of us. Great. And then here in the, sorry.
Selik.
Oh, Selik. Yes.
Serik have problem with microphone. Serik from Kazakhstan, NPO, Sexual Reproductive Health. Sorry.
Hello, Serik.
Yeah, he has technical problem with microphone.
Okay, great. So, and then here in the regional office, you can't see on the screen, but there are several of us here. Can we just quickly say who we are? Ali?
Hello, this is Ali Shirazi, Policy Advocacy Specialist. Good to be here.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. This is Teymur Seyidov, Program Specialist on Sexual Reproductive Health.
Good morning, everybody. Tamar Khomasur, the SRH Advisor. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Balar from ICA office, youth partner.
Hello, my name is Antonina. I'm monitoring and evaluation officer here.
And in case anything goes wrong, we've got Hussein hiding in the corner. But I don't think anything is going to go wrong.
Yeah, hi, good morning. My name is Hussein. I am ICT specialist. Thank you.
Olivier, would you like to say hello and introduce the team there in ANSA?
Okay, great. Thank you very much, team. So my name is Olivier de Gang. I am professor here at the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences at Ghent University in Belgium. And I'm the director of the International Center for Reproductive Health that Ian already mentioned earlier on. The International Center for Reproductive Health is a World Health Organization collaborating center. So we have WHO CC status. And we work very, very closely also with UNFPA in the ICA region. We've been doing that already for 3 years with Tamar and the colleagues. We're also coordinator of a global network that regroups academics, different universities working on sexual and reproductive health. We have partners in the United States, in Latin America, in Europe, Africa, Asia, so covering many countries worldwide. I must admit that the ICA region is a blind spot in our network, so I'm always interested in getting to know other researchers and academics active in your countries. So this is already a warm call to join us if you have colleagues there. So I will let my colleagues introduce themselves, and you will hear more from me later during this webinar.
Hi everyone, I'm Emily Peters. I'm the policy officer here at ICRH. So what I'm trying to do is try to bring research closer to policymakers. I have a background in parliament and in civil society organizations doing advocacy work. So it's quite interesting for me to be able to have this webinar today and to work with you on this specific focus. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Thank you very much. I'm Katrina Perahudov. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the International Center for Reproductive Health, and I worked with the Answer Network on this project. My background is in research and advocacy for access to medicines, and I'm now working on sexual and reproductive health and ways to merge those two together.
Thank you very much, Katrina, Emily, and Olivier. It's very nice to see you. Some of you may remember Olivier, and actually I still have in my mind one particular slide that he showed when we had the ICPD review in Geneva a year and a half ago, and he made the sort of very catchy but significant phrase which filtered into all the documents that came out of that ICPD review, which was the phrase, the floor of averages. And I can still see, Olivier, the drawing that you had with the line and then the person falling into the hole, which illustrated the point that if we just look at averages, we're going to miss something important. And actually, if I...
I'm glad
Sorry?
it had such an impact, Ian.
I'm a very visual person, I guess, but also sort of shifting to a little bit into the webinar this morning. I think that's one of the reasons why this work is so very important for the countries in the region and even beyond. So I'd like to say a little bit about 3 things as to why I think it is so important that we take this work forward. The first one is about the action plan, the SRH action plan that was approved by the regional committee of the WHO. It was a joint initiative by UNFPA and WHO. And when I first came to the regional office, it was one of the signature pieces that we'd put in place, and we were very, very excited by that. And since then, there's been quite a lot of momentum. But I think that what we need to do is to sustain that momentum to help our national counterparts make sure that those action plans are really really taking them forward, that they are being measured properly, that there's learning, and that we're rigorous in our approach to making sure that what is on paper translates into what becomes reality for those we're here to serve. So there's a lot of momentum around the SRH action plans. In a couple of weeks at the Regional Committee of WHO, it will also be on the agenda, although I suspect they're going to be preoccupied with the selection or the election of the new regional director, but it is still part of the mechanisms within the WHO governance system. So it's kind of very opportune that we give an extra push to this momentum. Secondly, and this is where I come back to that drawing that Olivier presented in Geneva, I think that the checklist and the indicators are really vital for making sure that we can hold our governments accountable for those plans and make sure that they're comprehensive. And what I like so much about the checklist is it's really emphasizing the connection, not just in the Ministry of Health world, but more broadly, and lists some of those really critical documents related to rights, which are listed in there. And that, I think, is such an important thrust for us as UNFPA, but even more broadly within the wider Sustainable Development Goals context. And likewise, the indicator framework is really, really important for making sure that we're tracking the progress and it fits into not only the action plan, but the broader statistical and monitoring systems in all the countries. And I think the third thing that I like so much about the checklists and the checklist and the indicators is it calls on us to think more profoundly about the partnerships that we're engaged with to deliver the results in those action plans. The necessity to engage with those organizations that work at the community level, the necessity to look at maybe civil society organizations that are not in the health sector, but maybe working on women's empowerment issues. I think the toolkit and the checklist encourages to broaden and deepen the work that we do, ensuring rights and choices for all. And finally, I think it's very important because of where we are now. I referred to the ICPD at 25 review in Geneva. Of course, we're still celebrating ICPD at 25, UNFPA at 50, the SDGs at 5. There's a very important agenda for us as an organization preparing for Nairobi. There will be this global summit to celebrate and to identify what more needs to be done for the ICPD agenda going forward. And for many of us at country level, the significance of that is being translated into national commitments where stakeholders will put in writing and speak powerfully to their commitments around the rights and choices agenda in Nairobi, but also translate that into our programming. And we're in a very exciting, somewhat unusual position whereby this region has more countries developing their next round of country programs than any other region in the world. So our region will be in the spotlight in terms of the programming value propositions that we're going to be putting forward. And I hope that these tools will enable us to do so very powerfully in the SRH and broader agenda for UNFPA. So I think it's really important then, because of the momentum around the action plans themselves, because what the checklists and the tools provide us with, and thirdly, because of that broader agenda at the international and national level. So it's very exciting to hear where we are. I look forward to the conversation, the ideas, the suggestions. And with that, let me hand over to Tamar, who will also give us some indications as to the tools that we're discussing today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And dear colleagues, thank you very much for joining the webinar. And before I start my short introduction, I'd like to thank Answer Team and in particular Olivier for fantastic work, comprehensive assessment of our needs and addressing them so well during the last 2 years. And I believe that the quality and comprehensiveness of both tools are the best evidences of this. Thank you very much. I'll have a very short introduction, and basically this is not introduction of tools, this is introduction of the context, internal and external context, which guided us on gaps and opportunities. And can you switch the presentation, please? Second slide. And I'll start from 2014, exactly 5 years ago. It was ICPD 20 review, and strategizing and conceptualizing next steps, it was evident that there was need for SRH regional framework for Eastern Europe and Central Asia, but we assessed that we assessed that European Union member countries needed such regional framework as well. So in 2014 at the Regional Committee, UNFPA suggested the participants to initiate the work on SRH regional framework. And we started our work with WHO and member states, which continued for 2 years. And there are 3 key issues that this European SRH action plan brings to the countries. First of all, this is aimed at implementation of ICPD and SDGs, and actually it is linking these 2 important development frameworks. It's built on human rights and leaving no one behind principles, and it can unite European Union and ECA countries under one strategic document. So both donor and recipient countries are guided by the same principles, objectives, and ICPD and SDG goals. As you know, in 2016, the European SRH Action Plan has been endorsed by 50 member states. 3 member states abstained, and the member states made the commitments to develop national action plans and to report on success in 2019 and 2022. Immediately, the country started development of the plans, and ANSWER, UNFPA, and WHO provided technical assistance to ECA countries. Providing such support, we understood that there was priority, there was need for new regional tools. To harmonize and advance the quality of the national SRH action plans, to make them more focused on top priorities and unfinished agenda of ICPD and SDG goals, but also to introduce a new monitoring tool to harmonize the SDGs, ICPD, and European Action Plan monitoring for all countries, both donor and recipient countries. So this is how we started our collaboration with ANSWER on these 2 important tools. And in 2018, the final draft of the quality assurance checklist and monitoring tool has been developed. 2019 is critical year for all our region and UNFPA globally, and development, all global community. With ICPD review, with first reporting results, we'll see in 2 weeks, actually, in Copenhagen, a new round of country development frameworks, and CPD will need strong regional tools, which will be provided to countries. Rolling out these countries at the national level, I think will contribute to both national strategic planning processes, but also to cooperation and impact-oriented programs between not only UNFPA and government, but UN and government. Next slide, please. So where we are now and what is the support of regional tools to national SRH action plans, but also what is the support these tools can provide beyond the SRH action plans? First of all, these are national development frameworks and of course UNFPA country programs. Here I put just two documents, the covers, and also the key sources and resources. In addition to these sources, there are multiple resources that these two tools are based on. First of all, about quality assurance checklist. It's based on ICPD program of action and SDGs. It's based on international agreements, declarations, and human rights instruments. It's also based on UNFPA transformative goals and new approaches that our strategic plan suggests. In particular, I'd like to draw your attention that quality assurance checklist now reflects our transformative goals, but also approaches to strengthen health system blocks, to assess the contributions to the blocks, and to monitor this contribution and impact through monitoring tool. About monitoring tool, this is, I think, first ever attempt and first ever result in UNFPA and even WHO to merge and harmonize different monitoring tools we developed during many years. And right now, the monitoring tool is based on 4 key resources. First of all, this is UNFPA strategic plan monitoring indicators. Then European SRH Action Plan monitoring framework, which is adopted and approved by, endorsed by member states. This is SDG monitoring indicators, and most importantly, the ICPD 25 regional monitoring framework, SRH part. And by the way, I'd like to thank again Olivier for his support to review of the regional framework, which make this framework very well linked to the regional strategic frameworks in the area of SRH. So this is where we are now, and we expect Nairobi commitments. I believe that UNFPA and its partners and governments have unique opportunity to strategize Nairobi commitments and to apply these 2 important tools to the processes of process of development of national SRH action plans, to engage governments, to make sure that governments are owners and they feel commitments, they are committed to use these 2 tools. Then we can translate both human rights-based approaches and impact-oriented monitoring processes at the national level. We can apply these 2 tools to development frameworks, UN national development frameworks processes. More UN agencies, more partners are using these tools. We have higher likelihood for success to implement Nairobi commitments and ICPD. And last but not least, these tools can help UNFPA to develop, implement, and monitor result-oriented country programs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tamar, for that more detailed overview of why we're taking this forward. According to the agenda, now I pass on to Katrina.
Yes. Thank
so
you.
Over to you, Katrina. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could we see the slides? It is in our slide pack. It's the 4th slide in the pack. It says tools to support the development and implementation and monitoring of the action plan for sexual and reproductive health in support of the European Regional Action Plan. Before I start, I just want to make sure that you have them, otherwise it probably will help everybody to follow. So Hussein, do you have the file? Perfect, excellent. Slide 4, please. One before that, please. Well, it doesn't matter. Okay, thank you very much this morning. I would like to take a closer look at the 2 documents that you will have received with this webinar. The first is the monitoring framework. It's at the top of the slide. And the monitoring framework is really a collection of indicators that can be used as a sort of blueprint to monitor national action plans. And as Tamar mentioned, it feeds from existing monitoring frameworks around the SDGs, the Global Strategy on Women's, Children's, and Adolescents' Health, the ICVD Plan of Action, and the WHO European Action Plan for Sexual and Reproductive Health. So I'll come back to explain the monitoring framework in detail in a moment, but I'll turn to the second document that you will have received. It's the Quality Assurance Checklist. And this is really a collection of minimal standards that exist or have been agreed at an international or regional level, and they're meant to guide really the how of implementation. So now if we can leave the Quality Assurance Checklist and we'll move to the monitoring framework on the next slide, please. Let me tell you a bit about how the monitoring framework was developed. It's a collection of evidence-based indicators. And as we were assembling them, we applied 3 principles, 3 C's really. The first C is comprehensive. So we cast our net wide in order to collect all of the indicators that are currently being used in international monitoring frameworks, but also in academic literature and other policy publications. So we really amassed all of the known indicators for sexual and reproductive health. The second principle that we used is conceptual clarity. So we took a look at our group of indicators and selected those that were unambiguous and that related to each objective in the European Action Plan on Sexual and Reproductive Health. And then we also went for our third C, our third principle, which is convenience. We then ranked indicators based on their suitability and how convenient they would be to monitor. Because, for example, we prioritized indicators that are already being collected by national agencies and other groups or through international monitoring frameworks. So following the application of our 3 principles, we came out with a short list of indicators, which we sent for expert review by 24 members of the ANSWER network. And through their feedback and insight, we refined the list and ended with 51 indicators that you'll see in this monitoring framework. Now, if you take a look at the right side of the slide, this is an example of how the indicators are organized. They're organized by objective, which is written across the top of the page. Below that, you have a list of the key indicators that help to monitor that objective. That's in the table. And below the table, you have each of those indicators explained in detail with a definition and an indication of the data source where you could look to find the information. Next slide, please. To tell you a bit more about the monitoring framework document, it also includes an electronically fillable indicator form. So this is found on page 7 to 10 of the document. And it is essentially a collection of all of the indicators in the document in one single place, and they're organized according to the data source. So you could see this as a sort of country report card if it was filled in at once. And an example of the indicator form is on the right side of the slide. This is an example of data from legislative documents, policies, and action plans. And when you open the PDF, you'll see that beside each of those yes comments, that there's a box you can click on in order to fill it in and complete it for the country that you're evaluating. Now, the indicators in this section continue on below this to be organized by their data source, such as civil registration systems or other indicators that are collected through surveillance systems, such as HIV incidents. Below that is indicators collected by surveys, and finally, indicators that can be collected from health facilities. So that is a brief introduction to how the monitoring framework was developed and how it is actually organized when you're using it. If we could move to the next slide, please. I'll now turn to the quality assurance checklist, which is a checklist that collects all of the international standards into a single place. So you could see it as a one-stop shop for how the monitoring framework can be implemented. And it includes 4 main domains. The first is it looks at different dimensions of sexual and reproductive health and rights to ensure that they're all addressed in a national action plan. For example, action plans should address the unmet need for contraception, as well as the need for infertility treatments. So the range of SRH dimensions can be found there. The second domain is in international and regional instruments. This is a comprehensive list of all international law, declarations, agreements, and WHO strategies that apply to sexual and reproductive health. So if they're applicable to your national context, then this is a handy checklist to go through and ensure that those important aspects have been addressed in the action plan. The third domain is the inclusion of 6 building blocks of health systems. So it's a reminder to ensure that these 6 different perspectives and building blocks have been addressed in each action plan. And the fourth domain is the use of adequate information systems and proper monitoring and evaluation. So this means, for example, including monitoring systems that will collect survey data or have targeted surveys. It also includes the regular analysis of surveillance data, as well as census or national civic information. And finally, it emphasizes ensuring that that information is evaluated and it feeds back into the policy process around the action plan for sexual and reproductive health. So this is a short overview of the quality assurance checklist, which is the second document you received. And with that, I'll pass off to Professor Olivier de Goma to continue.
Thank you very much, Katrina. I will just address a few examples of evaluation work that we've done in the past 2.5 years together with UNFPA regarding the implementation of action plans of the strategy and the translation of the action plan into national strategies and national approaches. The first example I will give is a review we made for the national program on SRHR of the Republic of Moldova. I don't think I saw anyone from Moldova in the participants, but maybe I missed someone, but I don't think that Moldova is represented. Correct? Okay, I guess so. Anyhow, so just to give you the context, in early 2017, we were asked by the World Health Organization and UNFPA to perform a review of an action plan. Sorry, and can you please go to the next slide, Jose? Yes, and the next one already. Yeah, there. To conduct a review of a national program on SRHR that the Republic of Moldova had just developed. So we received a draft of this program and were asked to assess this. This program was a follow-up to a 10-year strategy that had run from 2005 to 2015, and the period covered by this new program was meant to be 2017 to 2021. In the document that we received, in the draft that we received, there was a clear explanation of the current situation. So actually back then in 2016, there was an overview of the lessons learned from the previous strategy and what should be taken into account in this new program. There was an overview of all activities. In total, 4 specific objectives were presented with detailed interventions and their related activities. And finally, there was a grid with monitoring and evaluation indicators that was presented. The overall objective of the assignment that we received from WHO and UNFPA was to review this draft document with a focus on consistency and coherence, on scientific soundness and the application of WHO language, and alignment with the WHO European Region SRHR strategy. So what we did was we circulated this draft document within our answer network, and so shared it with several SRHR experts, asked them to provide input, their view on specific aspects of the strategy. We have thematic experts. We asked to look at specific sub-objectives or specific interventions and provide us feedback. All this was compiled in a review. We had a rather standardized approach also, where we compared the objectives and the interventions of the draft national program to 3 different global and regional networks. The first one was the SDG framework. The second one was the global strategy for women's, children's, and adolescents' health. And the third one was, of course, the action plan for the European region. What we did was we identified topics and aspects that were relatively underrepresented in the national program compared to those frameworks. So we created a matrix identifying all objectives, all aims within these different regional frameworks, and compared that to all the different objectives of the national program, crossing basically the linkages that were present. We also performed an assessment of the proposed monitoring and evaluation indicator framework. And again, we compared that to indicators that had been proposed in the 3 aforementioned global frameworks. The overall conclusion of this assessment was that the proposed national program was relatively well aligned with these frameworks. There were some gaps, however, that we had identified related to HIV, domestic violence, and also harmful practices, for instance, female genital mutilation and early marriage. But this was probably due to the fact that those topics were also the subject of other specific national plans or strategies that were not necessarily included in this action plan. Second point of concern was, however, that several of the weaknesses and the barriers that had been identified from the previous strategy and were clearly mentioned in the state of affairs had not really been addressed in this new plan. An example there was that financial barriers were considered as one of the key bottlenecks there. And that basically this new program, this new strategy did not really address or present approaches that would provide solutions for these financial bottlenecks. So that was to a certain extent a limitation of it. Finally, with respect to the monitoring framework, we saw that several of the indicators that were presented in the monitoring framework were SDG indicators and therefore were certainly relevant and useful. Others were sometimes relatively vague and could introduce risks of biases. And so this would warrant a more detailed presentation of definitions of indicators of design, etc. Next slide, please. So based on that experience, we thought that this could lead to some kind of a standardized approach to evaluate further policy documents. So basically, the idea was to keep this approach of cross-tabulating regional frameworks or global frameworks with documents that we would receive that would present programs, national strategies, national action plans. So we developed a tool that basically scans through a whole document, typically a Word text, and identifies patterns of text. These can be keywords, these can be combinations of specific words that we consider related or relevant for specific objectives in the Euro action plan or in, for instance, SDG or in the global strategy. So we have identified a whole list of these keywords and word combinations, and the tool scans a document for all these different text patterns. identifying basically what is included in national action plan and what can be aligned to, for instance, the WHO Euro action plan. And this results in what you see on the right side. For instance, this is one of the interventions that is presented in the Euro action plan. So involving a wide range of relevant partners, etc., etc. And what you see below is basically what this tool has extracted from what I mentioned in the previous slide, the Moldova action plan. So this is just like a pilot, a test case that we had. We ran this tool on the Moldova document, and these are bits and pieces from the document that are identified, that are captured by this tool, and that are flagged basically as potentially relevant for this intervention, this action within the action plan. Of course, we will need a human evaluator after that to see if what the computer, what the software has identified is indeed relevant, or if this is just a fallacy of the system and is not really of use. This is a warm call to all of you. If you have documents that you would like us to process through the system, to validate the system, please share these documents. This is a tool, this is an algorithm that will become better and better as it is being used. New word combinations will be generated. It will grow organically. And so the more we can feed into the system, the better it will become. Next slide, please. The second example I want to give is an evaluation we did in the last 6 months here in the Belgian context. We asked 2 master students here at the university to make an analysis of the implementation of the WHO Euro Action Plan in the Belgian context. Now, Belgium has a relatively specific context in which we have a federal level and a regional level, and where the content, the different teams included in the action plan are basically scattered across those 2 different levels. And so some of the activities are coordinated at a federal level, other activities are coordinated at the regional level, which kind of complicates to a certain extent a detailed analysis. Now, we contacted many people, many different stakeholders in the Belgian context. And the first finding was that many of these stakeholders who are all working on SRHR said that they did not wish to participate because they had absolutely no clue what we were talking about. They were not aware of this WHO European Action Plan, even though they were working on SRHR. So in the end, we had our students performed interviews with 12 different stakeholders, asking them to identify barriers and potential enablers for the implementation, for the rollout of the action plan. We had some findings, and the first one was that basically many of the stakeholders said that very little effort had been done at national level to inform organizations, to inform different stakeholders of the existence of this action plan. And this was for us relatively a blatant finding, because it's relatively easy to inform your stakeholders of this. I think there are many meetings, many fora in Belgium that would serve this purpose, and basically no one really took a step in doing so. One of the potential causes of that, and it's an underlying second finding, is that there was not really one lead agency that was identified to coordinate this implementation. No one really took a lead in this and said, look, we will inform our partners, we will have an oversight of this implementation, we'll work on that. So that was kind of a second important finding that we had. And thirdly, there was, and that was considered one of the main barriers, there was too little technical guidance as how to implement the interventions, the actions that were presented in the action plan. And this is something that I've heard also from other countries already, it's not only Belgium. So I really think that this is an important finding that is seen in many different contexts. Despite this, the interviewees all agreed that having a specific action plan, regional action plan for SRHR is a very important signal of the importance of the topic in the region. And not only for countries, for instance, in the ECA region, but also in the European Union, in Western Europe, many countries should really consider SRHR as still being one of the top priorities. In addition, many of our partners said that once they saw the action plan and got acquainted with what was mentioned in the action plan, many of these interventions, many of these activities were actually already implemented. So basically, without really knowing that people were implementing the action plan, the activities and the interventions were already ongoing. I do believe, however, that putting this in a broader, global, or at least regional, multilateral framework is a huge added value and creates some kind of ownership and team feeling among these different stakeholders. And I would urge governments to really focus on that and inform people of this. So that was a quick overview of what we found in Belgium. I would be happy to hear of your own experience in your countries, if what we identified is sounds familiar, or if you have completely different insights from your national context. So I think that will be for the Q&A session, but first I hand over to my colleague, Emily Peters.
Thank you, Professor. Can I have the next slide, please? So what I will present to you today is some recommendations that came out of the evidence that ICRH collected by the two projects that Professor de Gomme just presented. So the evaluation of the national program of Moldova and the assessment on the knowledge of the Belgian stakeholders. Because we really believe that this experience can help to optimize the development of the process and the content of the national action plans in the region. Not only related to the WHO action plan, but as also the ICPD program of action or the SDGs. What's really important here is that this list of recommendations is not a final list. It's a list with some recommendations that we collected so far, but we would be really happy to hear from all of you about your experience and maybe some recommendations that you had from learning in the past and that we can add to this list. So it's more of a work in progress that we're presenting here. So we have, we made 4 different types of recommendations. The first is about baseline assessment. The second one really looks at the development of the national plan itself. Then we have a third one on monitoring and evaluation, and a fourth part on stakeholder involvement and communication that was already mentioned as well. So let's start with the baseline assessment. It's really important to look at the situation before you start developing the national action plan. Really look at not only the health-related information in country, but also the existing legal frameworks to have a good overview of how the situation is before the work continues. What's also important here is, of course, the disaggregation of data by gender, by age, but especially by key populations, the most vulnerable people in your country. Maybe I can refer here to the floor of averages that Professor de Gomme presented in a previous presentation. It's, of course, we really believe that it's important to look at databases that are already existing. We don't want to duplicate work here. It's really important to know where you can look for all this information. A second recommendation is about stakeholder mapping. Was already mentioned in the presentations of Professor de Gomme, how important it is to look at all the stakeholders working on SRHR in the country before developing the national plan, but really also in the full process. So when you do the baseline assessment, try to involve them as much as possible, development, and then the monitoring and evaluation as well. The stakeholder mapping ideally should involve government representatives, civil society, academics, as wide as possible. And then third one is about looking at the neighboring countries. We see a lot of country representatives on the call here. It's really important to look at each other's situation, to compare and to learn from each other. A lot of countries have already developed their national action plan, are already reviewing it. Others are still in the process of developing it. So how can we look and compare with the countries around you? When it comes to developing the national action plan, we also have 5 recommendations that we'd like to share with you. The first one is that it's really important to look at the context of your country. Of course, every country is different, even maybe some regions within your country can be different. It's really important to take that into account. We see that the better you're able to involve that context and to use the specific context of your contracts, the better the implementation of the plans work in the end. Anticipation of political change. We want to look further than the elections. We want to have a national plan that continues even if the political situation would change. So how can you work on a broader scale that ensures that the work continues even if the political situation would change in your country? The consideration of available resources. It's important that your plan really represents a plan that's that you can implement. So in that sense, you have to take into account not only financial resources, but also human resources. How can we make sure that this plan is really it's able to implement it, and that we can really make it happen in the end. Clear distribution of the responsibilities. It was also already mentioned that if it's not clear who needs to take the responsibilities at the end, it might be that your plan will not be implemented as good as it should. So be clear from the beginning on who will be responsible for what parts of your plan. And a multidisciplinary approach. It's very important to involve people from all backgrounds into your plan. The more eyes you have to look at it, the better it will be, and the less chances you have that some parts are missing in your national action plan. Next slide, please. So then we come to monitoring and evaluation. It's very important to have, of course, a proper monitoring and reporting system, but also to make people accountable. For example, WHO asks for a 5 years reporting on the WHO action plan. Who is responsible for that reporting and who collects the information? And then the indicator framework that was presented by Katrina is a really good tool to use to really look at how you're doing in your country, and in that sense strengthen your plans and your actions according to the needs in your country. Accountability Commission of Independent Experts. We saw that if there's a commission of independent experts looking also at the monitoring and evaluation of the plan, that this really strengthens the plans, because they often have some other views and opinions on the plans and on the monitoring and evaluation. And indicators at the subnational level, as we mentioned before, it's very important to look also more specifically maybe at some regions in your country, or at some populations within your country, and have specific indicators that look at that, to avoid a too general overview that doesn't include the key populations. And then the last section of recommendations is about the stakeholder involvement and communication. It's really important to communicate to all your stakeholders throughout the process. As we've seen from the Belgian case, if afterwards most of the stakeholders don't even know the plan that might relate to some problems, if in the Belgian case they would have communicated better with the stakeholders from the beginning and throughout the whole process, that would probably have helped also with the implementation. And then the engagement of the agents of your society, and especially those that are underserved and underrepresented. It will be really important to hear that voice, their voices, and to really develop and review your plan with their voices in mind, and coming from a bottom-up approach rather than a top-down, where we really involve all the groups that have a voice and that we're talking about. And lastly, the promotion of feedback towards the media, the general public and the stakeholders. It's of course very important, not only when you do great work with your plans and do the monitoring and evaluation, but that no one knows about it. So it's really important to also make it public, talk about it to the media, and make sure that everyone knows it, that it's visible. It can also only help to strengthen the impact of your plans. Next slide, please. This is just an overview of all the recommendations. I'm sure you can have a look at it once we share the recommendations, but these are the ones that I just mentioned. Next slide, please. What is now very important for us is, of course, the way forward. We really hope that the monitoring framework, the checklist, and the recommendations that we presented today can be good tools for rollout in other countries in the region. We also want to emphasize that we talked a lot about the WHO European Action Plan, but of course, all the recommendations are also very useful for the ICPD Plan of Action, as well as for the SDGs. And we really hope that in all kinds of national action plans related to SRHR, these can be taken into account. And lastly, but probably most important, I can tell you that ICRH and the UNFPA ICARO are ready to provide some support in the creation and the rollout of the national action plans. So please feel free to reach out to us if we can help you with any assistance on the action plans, or if you have any further questions to that. Next slide, please. Here are some reference about the documents that we talked about that you'll also get when you receive the presentations. Next slide. And then we're ready for questions, and we're looking forward to all your comments and responses. Thank you.
So Emily, Katrina, Olivier, thank you so much for a really clear and helpful presentation about the story of the development, but also the practical and the very detailed thinking that has gone into developing the checklist and the indicator framework. Really, really fascinating. I'm so excited when we in our own world use the term algorithm. Because I think, you know, we're kind of in an old-fashioned UN bureaucracy type world very often, right? And I love it when what I consider to be a cutting-edge term is not just used but applied to this tool. So I don't mean to be too facetious about that, but I think it's very clear that your technical and professional knowledge and those of the ANSWER network are really high quality, and what you've brought to these tools is really very, very impressive. So I think it's incumbent upon us as UNFPA country officers and regional officers to really make the most of all the thinking and reflection and consultation It's great to hear examples from using or from applying the tools in Moldova, and fascinating to hear the story of Belgium. So really interesting presentations and things for us to reflect on. So my understanding is now we've got about 25 minutes or so for colleagues in the country offices to ask any questions or to make any suggestions. So let's do that. After I've taken the questions from the country offices, then maybe there will be some questions or comments from here in the regional office. And then we can sort of wrap up and think through the practical next steps, if that's okay. So please, colleagues at country officers, please either just speak out, which I think is best. If not, you can write your questions in the chat. But primarily, let's try to show ourselves and speak out well, with any questions that you may have. Over to you, colleagues. Can you show the chat box? Yes,
Yeah.
no longer the...
It's empty. And if I may, I have two comments.
Let's just hear the... Let's just ask the... Okay. Sorry, so we have a fairly long chat from Leila. I don't know whether you can you in Ghent, can you see the chat list?
Yes.
The chat, yeah, so you can read the question, which is about the introduction of the monitoring framework.
If I may, I can...
Yeah, just speak to it.
Yes,
Speak
yes,
to it.
yes.
Ela.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you very much. You know, I really appreciate it. It's really very impressive to have such kind of really high quality tools at our disposal to advocate further and, you know, really advance the SRH agenda in our countries. But now I wonder, what is the thinking behind, how these tools will be positioned vis-a-vis the monitoring framework, which has been already introduced for the European Action Plan on SRH. So do we plan to introduce our newly developed tools, such as monitoring framework and checklist, as the documents that are to help countries to roll out the European SRH Action Plan and present them at the WHO maybe regional meetings? Or this will be our advocacy tools, like UNFPA advocacy tools for our, to advocate with our government for introducing. So I wonder, what can we else do to further strengthen positioning of these documents at the regional level? So this is kind of a nutshell of, bottom line of my question. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lila. That's a great question. Let's take a round of questions, if that's okay, and then we'll deal with the responses in batches. So that's a super question about the positioning of the tools. Are they mandatory, etc. Great. So any more questions, please? Questions or comments from the field? Can I ask one then? There were three dimensions for me that I wanted to ask questions about. The first one is about the financial barriers and financing generally. And I saw that in the checklist, there's reference to the 6 blocks of the health system approach by WHO, and one of those blocks is financing. And in the case from Moldova, financial barriers was something that had been found as one of the conclusions in the review. What more could be done to to go more deeply into the financing behind the SRH action plans. Any thoughts on that? The second question would be about the decentralized structures that you highlighted in the Belgian case. And I can think of, in our countries in the region, there are several, most of them have got some subnational structure, some provincial management. And I'd be quite interested to hear either from country office colleagues and or from ICRH about applying this at the subnational level as well as at the national level. So if there may be a regional, by which I mean a subnational action plan around SRH. How is that being taken into account and could it be useful in thinking around applying the tools? And my third question is about, and maybe it's a deeper question, but the sense of we're reviewing policy documents. So the tools enable, the algorithm enables us to look at a document. And I think that in the processes of Moldova and Belgium, what was really interesting was it moved out of just looking at a document to see what the document said, what it included or not, but a conversation with stakeholders. So actually making the policy pieces of paper real and consulting and hearing from people and the application of the policy. So I'd like to know a little bit more about any other lessons that you had from those experiences, because I think this is not just a paper-based exercise. We're looking to change things for people's health outcomes. So that dimension will be really useful. I'm sorry to have asked so many questions. Before you answer those, let me just ask again our country office colleagues if anybody would like to chip in a couple of comments or questions, and then we'll respond to them.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, but I'm sorry I can't identify the voice. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Nurgul Smankulova. I'm a national program analyst in Kyrgyzstan. So,
go ahead, Nurgul. Thank you.
My question: priority action areas for and other stakeholders. So we have set of priority action areas, the monitoring evaluation for supporting of the government and other stakeholders to support the action monitoring and evaluation strategy on RH. So I think we need to compromise two sections, one of the for the government and one of the set of priority action areas for the UNFPA to strengthen how it works to better to deliver RH issues in the country. Another issues, which is you mentioned before, Jan, about the financial strategy, because we just priority include regular government function relevant to RH, planning, budget, and monitoring and evaluation, along with action to support ensure adequate resource, for instance, a financial strategy. So to strengthen development, not only the planning and the budget, but also the strengthening accountability and oversight institutions. And the final, but it's not last, but not least, strengthen state duty-bearers ownership, strengthens the whole of the society rights holder ownership, because we, Emily mentioned on the government and the civil society. What about the private sector? So how we will be some of the indicator which is related to the private sector, how to engage the private sector. So, thank you very much. And also the support and priority human development needs, including to ensure that no one is left behind. So what is this SDG action plan related to SDG 3 and 5 will be included in our SRH action plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nurgul. Great set of questions. I think you're answering some of your own questions by the way you phrased that, but Thank you very much. Let's then now take a quick break and ask colleagues in ICRH if you would like to respond to any of those questions that we've heard from colleagues, and then also maybe Tamar would like to respond, and then we'll move into a second round of questions. So over to you, Olivier and colleagues.
Okay, maybe I'll take already first few questions, and starting with your third question, Ian, about the detailed qualitative interview aspect there. So how that basically works with the tool. I want to give another example that we're currently engaged in, and that basically relates to this tool. We're working for the Belgian government on a similar tool that identifies how gender aspects have been mainstreamed in the policies of the Ministry of Development Cooperation in Belgium. And so basically what they did is give us a database with all projects they have funded in the last 15 years. It covers like 1,000 different projects. And we ran this algorithm, this software on this database. And basically what came out is an identification of what projects were basically relevant for target 5.1, for target 5.2, for target 5.3, etc., etc. And what we're doing now is basically identify the officers that were related to those specific projects. And now we're in a phase of contacting these officers and have in-depth interviews with them on how they saw this implementation, how these were bottlenecks in what enablers they had. So from that perspective, I think the tool, if you run it on a database like that, so it's not only one single document, it can be on a huge database where it looks at different fields, different documents. If you do it like that, it allows you to, within 2 minutes, identify from a database of 1,000 projects, what projects would be relevant for what target, for what indicator within the SDGs or within the action plan. And so target basically who you should interview in your next round. So I'm not sure this answers your question exactly, but I think that this illustrates how it can be applied and how this very important aspect of having face-to-face interviews can also be introduced. And so this also links to the last question, I think, from Nurgul about also how SDG 3 and SDG 5, if that can be integrated. So yes, we have basically the same approach as what we have for the action plan now developed for SDG 5 in the Belgian context. But I think we can easily integrate it in the approach that we're using also for UNFPA, so that in assessment, in reviews and reports that we generate on your draft action plan, we can have one section alignment to the WHO Euro action plan and another section on alignment to SDG 5 and the gender mainstreaming in that. I will take the other question also from Ian on decentralized structures. This is a tricky one, decentralized structures. It's a tricky one to assess implementation, but it's also a tricky one in reporting. Because you may have, we typically ask national reporting, but what do you do when you have many different decentralized or regional entities that all have specific implementation, have specific indicators, etc., etc. An example of this is the education system, and to what extent SRH is integrated in education systems. I know in Germany, for instance, or in Switzerland, every federal entity has a separate education system, and so in some cases it might be integrated, in others it might not. So how do you report there as one national government and as one country the extent of integration of SRHR in your educational system. So there are some questions there. I don't know exactly how to address that because this is very, very specific to one specific context. And there I think that it's rather sitting down with the national stakeholders and seeing what is decentralized, how responsibilities are distributed, and together with them see to what extent checklists or monitoring frameworks need to be adapted. So I think it's difficult to have that as a standardized approach. I think that this is more on a case by case. Then maybe finally your question about the financial barriers. I think in the Moldovan case, the issue was that they had identified 15% of the population that remained uninsured and as such had limited access to health services. And basically the point was that in their whole plan, nothing was mentioned about how these uninsured people would also be included in this and how they would find solutions for that. Is there anything besides that? Yes, I think that this comes back to the whole question of universal health coverage. It goes much broader than only SRHR. It's looking at how can we guarantee that everybody has access to healthcare, and so include that within the broader discussion of universal health coverage. I don't know, Katrina, because I know that this is also a topic you're working on. Maybe you want to add something there?
Sure, maybe, thanks. I'll just jump in on the financing questions. It seems that there's, from this conversation, quite some interest in the financing aspects, which beyond identifying them as a building block of health systems, we didn't further specify. But on reflection, financing is not only related to the financing of specific SRH interventions, but also to universal health coverage, as Olivier was mentioning, and sort of whole of system approaches. So if I would go and expand on the financing a bit more, I would suggest that we look to the national context and whether there is a sufficient amount of financing for a basic universal health coverage package that includes essential SRH interventions. But also when I think of a whole of system approach, I also think of adequate financing for regular monitoring of population health, and to make sure that those surveys or surveillance or whatever form it takes is integrating key aspects that we want to monitor on sexual and reproductive health. So financing, I mean, transcends many aspects of the healthcare system. And it seems maybe after this conversation that it might be useful to identify those. And then coming to Nargul's question about adequate resources, maybe I'd like to turn back and ask the question, would it be useful to identify some general or evidence-based targets for financing that are known in the field of sexual and reproductive health? First question. And second question is whether it'd be useful to have a sort of a guidance checklist. It has to be applied on a case-by-case basis, but a guidance for what are adequate resources for implementing the Sexual and Reproductive Health Action Plan? What points should be considered? And is the government meeting its obligations to human rights and the right to sexual and reproductive health, as well as fulfilling the technical targets that have been set, that are being worked on by the UNFPA and also being set by the WHO? So two questions. One, would it be useful to have a more specified target about, or rather a more specified checklist on financial aspects of implementing a sexual and reproductive health action plan? And the first question relates to then having, that's a checklist also having targets, so having specific aims, I guess. Thank you.
I may have missed a few, but I think most of the other questions were not directly linked to what we have presented. Maybe one?
There was one question about the private sector, which I think is a very good addition to the recommendations that we gave, especially thinking about SRHR supplies and how we can make them more affordable would be good to have the voice of private sector in there as well. So I think it's a very good suggestion that we'll take with us. It's true that we didn't, when we interviewed the stakeholders in the Belgian case, we didn't involve the private sector, but might be that in other cases that would be a relevant solution.
So over to you.
Thank you very much, guys. Let me just, some of the questions were actually quite specific towards UNFPA, and I think Leila's was an example of that. Tamar, would you like to respond to that or any of the other questions? And then I'll go back to everybody for any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Colleagues, thank you very much for very interesting questions. I'll start with Leila's question concerning the tools. I'd like to underline that application of these tools at the national level, it is not mandatory. The main idea and purpose of developing these tools was to make shift from internationally or donor-driven development processes to nationally owned processes, planning, implementation, monitoring. From that perspective, I think that these tools have a unique opportunity to be used by national counterparts, both government and NGOs, for self-assessment, first of all, and then by international experts or community to assess the quality of the document or to assess the relevance of monitoring framework. From that perspective, I think that from WHO perspective, I know that WHO regional office have some monitoring frameworks which are mandatory, and I believe the question which Leila raised was related to maternal and neonatal health monitoring systems, which from WHO regional office are assessed and provided to the countries as mandatory indicators. Please make sure that these tools are not imposed to governments. I believe that first of all, there is opportunity to finalize these tools based on your comments and suggestions, and then to present these tools to governments, to community technical experts working at the national level, to make sure that they see in these tools guidance, technical support, and institutional capacity building sources. One important issue, I am sure you noticed that we're starting conceptualization of these two tools as supporting documents to WHO SRH action plan, regional action plan. However, the impact of these tools are much wider, longer term, and we think that these tools will be used beyond WHO regional action plan. And there are three main reasons. First of all, the countries which abstained from WHO regional action plan, they intend to develop some national programs aimed at implementation of ICPD program of action. So these tools are intended to all countries being part or being beyond out of the regional frameworks. Second, these tools can be used globally by regions and countries which do not have the regional action plan. Third main reason, I think, is that these tools are quite strong, and we do not want to limit the lifespan of these tools to the lifespan of the regional SRH action plan. As you know, the regional action plan is 2017-2021. So we believe that after 21, the countries may have national strategies which are longer term. They might be based on implementation of Nairobi commitments, etc. So we do not want to narrow down the frames of these tools, which are really unique and which are, I think, comprehensive. About WHO collaboration, WHO regional office is very supportive to these exercises. We initiated these exercises in consultative manner, and I think that after rolling out these tools at the national level, WHO will also advocate for applying these tools with their national offices. So maybe in a couple of months we'll have kind of joint meeting where we can talk and discuss how WHO and UNFPA country programs incorporate these tools for their country programs, which are quite different with duration, purpose, etc. Another question about national or sub-national application of these tools. I think that these tools can be used for regional sub-national levels as well. The governments or NGOs or community development community has opportunity to pick up most relevant issues from the quality assurance checklist and also to select the respective indicators from the monitoring tool. I believe that these are even great advantages to link sub-national development processes, planning and programming processes with national and even regional ones. So here we see the opportunities and linkages in a vertical manner. And also, if the countries at sub-national level will decide to have region-focused own sub-regional, let's say, plans, they can use the same tools, which means that in the same country, if they have 2, 3, 4 different programs developed by sub-regional governments, then these programs will be somehow harmonized from the very beginning. So I see here even more opportunities, but a lot depends now how governments accept and how they utilize these tools. So we really hand over these tools to country offices, and if any support is needed from our side to roll out it at the national level, to organize webinars or to bring technical expertise, we'll be happy to support. By the way, our cooperation for 2019 with ANSWER is fully focused on rollout of the tools and technical support to countries to develop the national plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamar, very much indeed for all of those responses. Just, I've seen there's a very interesting question in the chat box there from Behruz, and I think it may apply to other countries too. Getting hold of the data. Not all countries have surveillance systems for all the indicators. Any tips from you in Ghent on addressing that question? How do you get round the absence of data? What's a sensible approach here? Is there an amount of data that's needed, or how do can you extrapolate? Any thoughts on that, Olivier, colleagues?
That this is very risky business. No, it's true. I mean, we live in a context where some key data is indeed not available, and where we have to rely on extrapolations. But typically, those extrapolations have very stringent assumptions, and you would assume that the data that is available is either representative for the communities, the populations that are not covered by this data, or that you could use this as a proxy, approach it, or considering coefficient, extrapolate. But this is all guessing. This is guesswork. And so if you do this, it's again leaning towards the risk of averages. You may end up with an average and assume that this will also be applicable to other populations, whereas basically this is absolutely not the case. And so I think this, basically the answer comes down to, do policymakers, do politicians consider this a priority or not? And we see that everywhere people are asking for evidence-based decision-making. They want evidence, they want to see the impact of decisions that is being made, well, if you want the evidence, you'll have to pay for the evidence. And I think this is something that governments, and I know it's very difficult times to bring over that message, but good quality data has a cost. And this is something that has to be considered.
Thank you, Olivier. I think that actually this is an issue that many of our countries face and are working with on a fairly permanent basis. And I remember at the time of the SDG indicator framework, I think it was a country like Denmark that even Denmark could only get about 50 or 60% of the SDG indicators. So what's it like in Turkmenistan? It's a very difficult situation. So I think it's a question that colleagues are dealing with on a fairly regular basis in our countries. And I suspect that the advocacy around making sure that there are resources for good quality data is an important part of the existing work. I would also add to my colleagues that one of the things is to look for data in different sources and not only consider the statistical office. There are other mechanisms now that are gathering data, including in the private sector, and you can sort of scope and harvest data from more and more sources now, even if it is not a fully official or fully comprehensive. Sometimes it can add to the picture. And my second suggestion is that while, yes, we are in a world where evidence-based advocacy is very powerful and is our corporate approach, voices are also very powerful, and they may not represent the whole truth, they may not be scientific, but the story from a 10-year-old girl in an isolated region in one of our countries can be as powerful in terms of changing the way politicians address these issues as having a full data set on adolescent birth rate in the country. So it's not an either or, but it can complement, and I think that's what I would encourage colleagues to think about, not just for this exercise, but of course more generally when we're contributing to the discussions at the national level around SDGs and when we're developing our own country programs. Let me just check if there are any other questions. My assumption is that while this webinar will come to a close, Tamar, you'll continue to be dialoguing with the countries and with the colleagues in Ghent. I'll take country officers, and then I'll ask if my regional colleagues have any questions. I feel like an auctioneer. going, okay. Over to the regional office colleagues. Antonina?
So I have more not question but comment, and I really understand that we are talking about a monitoring framework, and I appreciate that you include monitoring and evaluation in your recommendations. But what is missing as for me, that we are talking more about accountability and summarizing of monitoring and indicators, but learning is missing from your recommendations. Learning. But learning, it is important to include there, because if you're talking about learning based on summarizing of monitoring and etc., we're talking about next steps and about way to look forward. So just short suggestion, when in your recommendation drawn from case studies and from analysis, to put not only accountability but also learning on data.
Yep. Very good suggestion. Thanks for that.
Thank you. Yes. Okay. Gone. No questions here from Istanbul. But why don't you make a comment and then wrap up?
I'd like to add one comment concerning the indicators. we all know we have huge gaps in the countries, especially when we're talking about SRH indicators. From that perspective, we discussed during our last year meetings with ANSWER, we see this monitoring framework as checklist to assess the gaps in monitoring systems of the countries. Because, okay, the countries can pick up the indicators they need right now, but they can see what is the share of indicators they do not have at the national level. We can use this checklist also as evidence to advocate for filling out the gaps in the indicator systems. And last but not least, I'm really grateful to ANSWER that in addition to indicators in this framework, we have the definitions and the ways of calculation. And all colleagues will agree, I think, that even MMR, we have so many different options and versions in the countries that in every country, even in each country, we have 2 or 3 variations. So I believe that this framework will harmonize the approaches and will bring these approaches closer to the standards. And last but not least, this is a unique moment, colleagues. The ICD new version, the International Classification of Disease new version, is now entering our countries, our region, and this version, new version, is the most advanced one reflecting SRH issues, sexual reproductive health and rights. So I believe that advocacy on monitoring framework should be process integrated in the ICD introductory processes in the country. So this will have dual impact on our success. So this was what I wanted to add about the monitoring. And once more, these tools are live tools. We continue to keep these tools open on our Google space, and ANSWER colleagues, UNFPA regional office, and all country offices will have access. So you will see your questions, your comments, your suggestions. From our side, we'll try our best to finalize the documents and to make both hard copy and electronic versions available and accessible for all countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tamar. Just, do we have a timeline for the next steps, just so that, or we will share that with the country officers? But I think that, so there's some practical learning carrying on with, by the end of September, okay. And I would just echo Tamar's encouragement to, you know, even if it doesn't completely work, to try and use this, to learn from it, and to apply it beyond not just SRH, but also around the country, the different country processes. We will never have perfection, but this can be really helpful in driving the agenda ever forward. Just to recapitulate that, to recap, sorry, that the tool is not mandatory, but I think it's really, really helpful. So let's try and apply it as much as we can, and I'd encourage country officers to do so. And also to think about some of the other issues that we've talked about today that may be an expansion of the tool, or they may be further incorporated into the different tools around the financing, the private sector, the new partnerships, universal health coverage, different levels, different stakeholders to be engaged. That's very exciting, and I hope we can work that through in all that we do. At the regional office level, we'll of course, led by Tamar, continue to reach out, support, and hope that you can make as much use of this as possible. I'm going to give a final word to Olivier, Katrina, and Emily, but I just wanted to, their call at the beginning about encouraging academics in your countries to become part of their network is something that we very strongly encourage, because it's all part of this east-west, west-east learning for individuals, but also connecting institutions in Western Europe and in our region. I think that that's a really, really very positive approach, then I would encourage you to do that. And then, of course, to also thank the team in Ghent and those others who've worked through their networks on this very much for producing such a quality piece of work and such a useful set of things to ensure rights and choices more and more in where we're working. So Olivier, Emily, Katrina, any final words from your side, and then we'll close.
Well, let me thank you very much for organizing this. We're very happy to collaborate with UNFPA, especially with Tamar. I think in the last 2 to 3 years, the collaboration has been very successful, very smooth as well. So thank you very much for that. As I said, and as Ian reiterated, Eastern Europe, Central Asia is definitely a region that we want to explore further within our network. We are hosting a one-day workshop here in Ghent in November on SRHR in Eastern Europe, Central Asia, to which we warmly invite everyone, and we can circulate, I think, the information. So please get in touch with us if you're interested or if colleagues are interested, and we hope to see you all there. Thank you very much. Leno.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Olivier, Katrina, and Emily. Lovely to work with you over these last few years and looking forward to doing so in the future. Colleagues in the field, thank you very much for taking time. I hope you find this useful, and of course we'll be following up with you to make sure that we can make the most of all of this. For now, from Istanbul, thank you all very much indeed. Have a great rest of day, and we'll be in touch in due course. Thank you all. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.